also really well-known, really experienced, skilled players. And Aditya, we can see his accomplishments: Los Angeles Regionals top 4, World Cup of top 4 India, which was last year, and then Vancouver Regionals top 8, and Madison Regionals top 8. And oh, look at that team that Aditya is running.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth noting again, we are seeing a lot of this Sneasler and Didi combination, and I mean, it's just such a strong team, right? Like, I mean, if I had to bet on any pair of Pokemon doing well, I'd probably bet on Indeedee Sneasler just because of like how often they're just like doing well together, right? And again, we're seeing it paired with the Electabuzz and Ursaluna. I just feel like they're all like best friends at this point. You know, they hang out like, you know, they share some drinks, they chill around the barbecue, and they just keep playing VGC together, and then Dondozo and Tatsugiri show up to the party as well. They're there. I think it's to kind of give more of a mind gaming nature to the match, right? Obviously, you're able to force some mind games. Maybe if you lead something like Dondozo and Sneasler, you're able to switch out the Sneasler to Tatsugiri, go for an attack. Maybe switch out Dondozo to Indeedee, you get on Burn and Boost, go for an attack. So there's some mind games with this team, and I think definitely leaning into the kind of almost 2-2-2 nature of the team.
Oh yeah, definitely. And sometimes players might even opt to just bring the lone Tatsugiri or the lone Dondozo just as a showcase of how skilled they are as a player, that they don't need both of them together on the field at the same time. But of course, Aditya's opponent, Francesco Pio, is also a veteran of this game, and I'm sure he definitely will have a game plan going up against Aditya's team. So let's take a look at Francesco's team and what he's going to be running. But also, Francesco's achievements, very recent Stuttgart Regional finalist just last week, LAIC top 16, World Cup finalist, of course, that was 3 years ago, and Players Cup top 4 in also this 2021. And Francesco is going to be running that Amoonguss, Incineroar, Basculegion, Golden Go, Pelipper, and Archaludon. So a very familiar hyper-offensive rain team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a team that Francesco did use at Stuttgart Regionals to get second place. And obviously, using a strong team is good in World Cup, of course, right? There are some risks associated with just bringing the same team again, right? A lot of times, players will be thinking about how to counter what you've been using in previous weeks. How do you approach that, right? And you really have to make sure that you have plans who are going for those kind of counter teams, right? Notably as well, something that we saw above, which I thought was a really intelligent choice from Rajan against Marco, was Rajan was actually running Electroshot Archaludon with Electabuzz, right? And that was really strong into Marco's rain team. So I think Adi opting to go for an approach, maybe covering for a bit wider variety of teams, but even then, Electabuzz is really good into rain composition. So I think, Francesco's going to have to be careful, like not letting the Electabuzz get too much damage. That being said, or doing too much on the field, I suppose. But even then, right, I think the big thing too is like if you can threaten the Golden Go setup, right, get a nasty plot up potentially for a lot of the team besides the Dondozo. But typically you're almost always shoehorned into taking Incineroar and Amoonguss when you're against a Dondozo team because you need to be able to swap in when they kind of combine the two, right?
Yeah, Francesco has to be very careful of this Dondozo Tatsugiri combination, but there's so many different options that each player can make. So I believe our game is ready. So we're going to dive straight into the game and see what our players have chosen. Looks like Francesco is going to go with that immediate rainbow with the Basculegion and the Pelipper versus Aditya's size spam mode of Indeedee and Sneasler.
I mean, there's actually a lot of cool options here, right? So obviously, Adi going for the kind of default like Indeedee Sneasler lead, which I think makes sense, right? You want to be able to pressure immediately. But there's actually quite a bit of scary mind games here, right? You can obviously just go for the safer play, which is go for an expanding force and a double attack, right? You can opt to go for protect here, which we are seeing like Adi lock in the protect there. I think that's a very, very intelligent play because you're able to get this expanding force pretty much no drawback. It's guaranteed damage, and you're always protecting yourself from like plays like switching Incineroar, go for flip turn onto Sneasler, going for something like a, just going for like a protect on Pelipper and attack in the Sneasler, right? So you're kind of just opening yourself up more opportunities to kind of scout out the turn and make a decision after you've seen how the board plays out. And Indeedee's pretty safe here because of that focus hash. We are going to see Pelipper switch out though.
Yeah, Pelipper switching out, which means that the Basculegion locked on the field is probably going to go for a move. That Incineroar coming in is going to drop the attack stage of both the Indeedee and the Sneasler, most effective on that Sneasler, but it looks like an immediate turn 1 terrestrialization coming off from our players. It is going to be onto that Basculegion, so Basculegion now becoming even more powerful with that Terra Water terrestrialization. And I think being in the choice and in the rain, that's going to do so much damage. Sneasler protect itself, and that Basculegion goes for the
Sneasler
into the Sneasler. Well done, nice call there from Francesco.
But now that means that Indeedee is just gonna be able to expanding force into the Basculegion, and because of that, now the Sneasler has so much more pressure here. You're able to now go for a close combat into the Basculegion. And even though Indeedee can't touch the Incineroar, if Basculegion wants to switch out maybe to Pelipper, if you opt to just go for an expanding force here, that could be a really way to stop Pelipper from coming in here. But that Protect was just such a good heads-up play. Now you're in such a strong position. You've chipped on the Basculegion for essentially free, and now you have a free close combat into a slot that's really hard for Francesco to react to, right? And I think like that was just a really well-positioned turn. Now, this is going to be a pretty difficult situation to get out of, right? You have to be able to kind of preserve that Basculegion if possible, or maybe opt to sack it, but it might not be the best to just lose it immediately, right?
Yeah. Francesco now withdrawing that Incineroar immediately and back to the Golden Go, so revealing all 4 of his Pokemon. Indeedee now going for the Protect this turn, so allows that Basculegion be free to go for it, but the close combat actually comes off immediately onto the Basculegion, just knocks it out, that Unburden boost, allowing the Sneasler to outspeed this Basculegion in the rain, and that's Francesco's terrestrialization option down without really having gotten anything out of it. Aditya has taken 0 damage, and Francesco's just lost a Pokemon, and also his Terra option.
Yeah, it's interesting to see here because I feel like another play Francesco could have made here, which would have been a really strong play, was actually opting to bring in the Golden Go for the Incineroar. I kind of wasn't expecting to see the Golden Go here because you're kind of disrespecting the Dondozo, but if you've opted to bring it because you're so worried about the size spam mode, that really probably should have gone in for Basculegion so you can avoid the Basculegion getting knocked out too early. But obviously they're just letting close combat go into the Basculegion. That's a really big piece to lose in this game, right? Again, like Adi's Pokemon are both at full health, so this is an incredibly good position. Notably though, the Golden Go is in a position where it can get a plot, so it can start putting on more pressure. But the thing is that you have lost a lot of resources, so you really need to start gaining ground as quickly as possible. The nice thing is at least the Sneasler is at -2 from 2 Intimidates.
Yeah, with that -2, those close combats aren't going to do very much, but that Helping Hand might help offset those attack drops. And looks like Golden Go going for a Protect, just trying to keep itself safe at this turn. But we all know that Adi did lock into the close combat onto this Incineroar, and that comes so close to knocking it out, but not quite enough. So that -2 attack drop from 2 Intimidates just paying dividends for Francesco there, and that knocking off the Focus Sash, but of course Indeedee uses it to hang on with that 1 HP, and means that Adi's still, in a relatively good position here.
Yeah, I mean, this is just great for Adi, right? Anything you're getting now in terms of damage is bonus, because again, like what you're trying to do usually when you lead Indeedee Sneasler, force a bunch of resource trades early, and then you're able to win with your back, right? And I just feel like Francesco playing way too past couple turns, right? Like I think the main thing that you need to do when you're behind at a deficit, right, like your Basculegion goes down like that, is you need to start taking more risk, right? So when you opt to go for Protect on Golden Go and you let the Helping Hand combat go into your Incineroar, you are just eventually going to lose too many resources to be able to even come back in the game. Like Adi has really been capitalizing off of the early lead advantage he was able to get, and we're going to see Dire Claw just go into that Incineroar. At that point, you could have thrown anything into that slot, so Dire Claw made sense because you're covering with the status potential, right? And even if you just get like a resisted expanding force, you're pretty much just setting up a board state where whatever you have in the back is almost always going to be able to win this.
Yeah, that does really good damage onto the Golden Go, and Golden Go will take a double knockout onto this 1 HP Indeedee and a bit of a chipped Sneasler. But at this point, Aditya still has 2 Pokemon, very healthy in the back. But of course, Francesco is also down to his final 2, but the Golden Go has taken lost a bit of health and is at -1. Of course, we do see the Dondozo Tatsugiri in the back for Adi, so that unaware ability is actually going to help the Golden Go in allowing it to just spam Shadow Balls and make it rain.
Yeah, and again, like losing the Basket Legion now, we're gonna see obviously it's a pretty scary impact, right? You also don't have Terra potential as well. So you can't even really try to go for that Terra Water, try and survive. You probably couldn't anyways because of the potential of just wave crashing in with +2 being strong, right? But I think another big thing here, right, that you have to kind of consider is you know, from Francesco's side, like, okay, I brought the resources to deal with Psychic Spam, but I didn't necessarily navigate them properly. Like, how do I adjust that going into the game? And of course, there are still like potential odds to win here. But at this point, what Adi can do is he can just play to stall out the rain, right? And as soon as you stall out the rain, Pelipper isn't really able to go for those accurate hurricanes anymore. And you can opt to just go for Terra Steel to resist anything Pelipper can throw out. And you're also covering here for the Golden Go just going for a Protect, right? So I just feel like Adi has navigated almost every single turn so far perfectly, given the circumstances at the front. And Francesco hasn't really been able to properly deal with the situation, partially because of the Pokemon on the board, but also because of the, also maybe because of playing a little too passive in turns.
Yeah, now that rain is gone, so the Pelipper really does not want to go for hurricanes outside of rain. We do see Adi going for his terrestrialization. It is going to be that Dondozo into the Terra Steel, so it will easily resist any of those hurricanes thrown at it. Now Pelipper, Weather Ball, outside of weather is just going to be a normal move, so Dondozo just completely walls Pelipper right now. Shadow Ball from the Golden Go is going to come off, and it's a critical hit onto this Dondozo. So Francesco not out of the game just yet. Hurricane also.
Oh my god! Wow!
Another critical hit. So this Dondozo just is not able to catch a break and just gets knocked out instantly. And all of a sudden, the tables have completely turned.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, like, I like, that's actually, I think, one of the craziest turns I've seen. Like, the statistical odds of that happening are so insanely low, right? I feel like Adi played this so well, to where it's like, you're sitting there and I'm like, okay, I'm good, like, let me just think about what I'm gonna do game 2, and then you see that turn come out, you're like, wait, what? Like, what just happened, you know? So, it's a blink and you miss it type situation, right? You're like, how did that happen? And I think, honestly, like if you're Adi, obviously, you're probably not very happy about how that turn played out, right? But I think Francesco, you know, if you're given such a good opportunity like this where you look at that double crit, right? Like, you really need to convert off of this advantage, right? Like, you essentially lost game 1 through, you know, like, obviously had, like, the odds, like, not been so crazy, right? So you need to make sure that your approach into game 2 and game 3 can properly navigate around the situation. Now, of course, there is a potential for, like, for example, if you go for a Weather Ball and a Shadow Ball and you don't want to miss, like, Tatsugiri survives, Muddy Water comes out, knocks out Gold, and Accuracy Drop goes on Pelipper, and then you can maybe protect, like, to stall the rest of the turns. But at this point, right, it's obviously a little bit scary from Adi's perspective, because, like, there's very little odds of winning. And we're going to see Protect come out from the Golden Go here, so...
Yeah, well, Francesco got 2 double crits, so anything's possible. But Hurricane now coming off onto this Tatsugiri. So Tatsugiri replying back with a Muddy Water that does connect on the Pelipper, doesn't do nearly enough, and does not get an accuracy drop. So Tailwind peters out, but 1v2 versus the Tatsugiri. I think Francesco has the higher odds of winning, and Golden Go just straight up outspeeds the Tatsugiri and will take the knockout with that Life Orb health. And Tatsugiri goes down, and I think Adi played really well, but that was a very unfortunate double crit there.
Yeah, I mean, that was crazy. Like, I've seen some crazy turns of, like, VGC, and I've been on, like, both receiving ends, right? I've, like, obviously had some lucky turns, and I've, like, received some, like, unlucky turns, and, like, I think that's up there for me. I haven't really seen something like that in, like, quite a while, because, like, the statistical odds of that are crazy, right? Because you have a 3% chance to crit, basically, right? So you 3%, and then Hurricane has a 70% to land. So you need to get that on top of that. And then you land the second Hurricane, which is another 70%. So that's, like, absolutely insane, right? And I think, but a big thing here is, like, even when you get unlucky, sometimes this happens in, like, VGC, this is part of the game, right? Obviously, you know, sometimes you would not like to have to deal with it. I think Adi's plan was pretty strong, to be honest. I felt like Adi had a lot of the advantage throughout the game, and like that board state was almost unlosable, right? And I think that Francesco really has to go back to the drawing board here, right? Like, obviously, the nice thing is you were able to get that game, even though it was a bit of a disadvantage for you early on. So how do you like actually convert off of this? You have 2 more opportunities now to win the game, right? Or win the set. And I think that what Francesco maybe has to do is kind of respect that Sneasler a bit more and not play as passive around it, because it really felt like in the early turns when we saw the helping hand like go or bring it down to red, right? And the Golden Go was going for backdoor, opting to go for like switch to Incineroar, flip turn into Sneasler. Like they're very conservative plays that are like, but when you're against like another good player, you have to be able to sometimes take some more risks to put yourself at a bit of an advantage.
Yeah, Francesco, I think losing that Basque Legion so early on really put him on the back, with his back against the wall. But of course, he did manage to pull through. I think he found probably the only line
so
on
crazy.
the tree in that game. And I'm sure that's something that both players will be keeping in mind for this game too, which I believe is going to be ready very, very shortly. So we are going to dive into our game 2 and see how our players are going to adjust with a Pelipper and Archaludon lead up against Sneasler and Indeedee.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess you can tell by how I reacted. Like it's a little tricky, right? Because Pelipper doesn't have access to wide guard, right? So Indeedee is actually able to put on quite a bit of pressure with something like a Terra Psychic Expanding Force in a close combat, right, into Archaludon. So tricky thing here is going to be, okay, am I able to, like, if I Terra Bug my Archaludon, then I'm taking neutral damage Expanding Force, which means I'm kind of building up damage. And you don't really have anything that can threaten a one-hit on either of these Pokemon. So even if Adi just goes for the straight-up safe play of, like, Expanding Force and Dire Claw on the Pelipper, like, Francesco's still kind of on the back foot here, right? Because you're able to just then attack again on top of that. And it's actually really hard to react to. Maybe the Pelipper Archaludon was covering something more, like, leaning towards Dondozo. Maybe that's what Francesco expected. But, I mean, there's really just a bunch of, like, safe plays to go for, right? Pelipper is going to be switching out here, likely going into the Incineroar, so you can just kind of absorb, you know, the Expanding Force. But it's a little tricky. I feel like it's kind of a similar situation to Game 1 where your partner slot is going to be taking a lot of damage you don't want to.
Yeah, that Incineroar now switching and dropping the Intimidate onto the Sneasler, so allowing the Archaludon to survive that close combat. But Archaludon is very heavily chipped, and Indeedee's Expanding Force is going to be resisted onto this Archaludon, with that Assault Vest. But Archaludon's going to take such heavy damage, and if he goes for, say, an Electroshock, it'll probably get that attack boost. But at this point, it's so heavily chipped, and Incineroar can't even go for the Fake Out in Psychic Terrain. So, you know, I think Adi has set himself up really well for this turn too.
Yeah, and Sneasler, obviously, with that Psychic Seed boost, being able to live the +1 Electro Shot just because of the nature of the boost, obviously, helping you out there, right? I have to really say, like, I think that, you know, Francesco obviously doing the best with that situation. You know, obviously, it's not that great, right? So you have to kind of play around it the best you can. But now this helping hand close combat play, again, it's really scary. And maybe because you did it last time, and just Francesco, you know maybe how he's going to react and opt for Terra, and if you click Expanding Force now, you're punished with even more damage, right? So at this point, like, something like Expanding Force close combat even is like a middle ground play. But we are going to see Protect thrown out there. And combat into Arch, pretty safe, right? You're able to just kind of get the knockout there. I think it's going to be really interesting, right? Because at this point, it's going to be a game of, like, how do you get rid of the Incineroar for Adi? And in Francesco's end, you kind of want to preserve the Incineroar so you can use it against the potential Dondozo at the back.
Yeah, looks like the bridge is going to go down from that close combat easily enough to get the knockout. So it allows the Incineroar to get an attack off, but Incineroar went for the knockoff onto this protecting Indeedee. So a fantastic protect from Adi there, just keeping itself safe for another turn. It means that because the Sneasler is at only a -1 attack, in the next turn it can go for the helping hand close combat, but there is that Amoonguss on the field. It's got redirection, it's got sleep, so, you know, where there's an Amoonguss, Adi probably has to be very careful about the Amoonguss going for those spores and rage powers.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem here that I don't like, that I think is a bit tricky, typically Amoonguss, when they're Terra Water, are better into Psychic teams, right? In this case, this Amoonguss is Terra Fairy, which means that if you go for Expanding Force Dire Claw into Amoonguss, you would cover for its Terra pretty perfectly, right? You'd be able to get a good chunk of damage. You could also just opt to ignore Amoonguss here because there is the potential of a Protect. That is the safer play that Francesco can make, and just opting to go for a knockoff. So at this point, right, there's definitely some tricky turns there, but we're going to see something pretty interesting here, which is going to be the double switch, which kind of makes sense. You're going to try and catch the Spore going into the Indeedee here. It is a little bit tricky, right? The nice thing is here is because you got rid of the Archaludon, how do you get rid of Dondozo?
Yeah, this Dondozo is in a really nice position. Of course, it might get put to sleep by the Amoonguss spores, but it will have to wake up eventually. And now we see both the Dondozo Tatsugiri on the field at the same time. So Dondozo is going to get all those really juicy boosts to all of its stats. So we can see them now, this very buff Dondozo on the field. Amoonguss just wanting to keep itself safe for this turn, probably scouting for an Expanding Force, but the knockoff does come off onto this Dondozo, so that knocks off the leftovers and prevents the Dondozo from getting recovery at the end of each turn. But the question still remains, how do you get rid of this very buffed up Dondozo?
Yeah, I think it's really just going to be a case of Francesco. Like, honestly, what we might just see happen here is, like, switch back in Incineroar, like, go for Rage Powder, maybe, then Parting Shot Rage Powder, like, just basically cycling over and over again, because at this point, right, your best bet, if you're Francesco, is I need to drop the Dondozo down really low. I need to eventually get a Pollen Puff onto my Pelipper once I switch it, take the attack for Incineroar, right? Or maybe if Audi opts to go for an Earthquake, you catch it by the Pelipper switch in. Great position, right? So it's going to be interesting to see here. Also, there is the option of Terra, so we are going to see the Terra be thrown out here. It's going to be going onto the Incineroar, which makes sense because you just kind of want to have that resist. It is going to be Ghosto, so if Wave Crash goes into it, that would be pretty scary. That would probably still knock it out. So was there a Rage Powder here? It's going to just be a plain Wave Crash going into the Incineroar. Going to be getting a clean knockout there. Leaving its Incineroar exposed might have been a really bad mistake there, because at this point now, you lose one of your best tools into the back as well. And you're stuck with the Pelipper that eventually Rain is going to expire again. And I don't know if you'll get as lucky to land all the Hurricanes this time, right? So it's going to be a lot.
Yeah, Amoonguss does manage to get the Spore off onto this Dondozo, so Dondozo is going to be put to sleep. But Francesco is now forced down to his final two Pokemon, and because Amoonguss can't even switch out, that Regenerator won't be able to help it regain health. So at this point, I think it looks like it's just a matter of time of letting the Dondozo get knocked out, and then you've got that Indeedee Sneasler in the back against this Amoonguss, which can no longer terrestrialize out of that poison type or psychic type weakness with its poison typing.
This just feels like a big uphill battle, right? I mean, if you're in Francesco's shoes, again, like, I think you maybe want to try and bank on a Hurricane crit, right? Because at this point, the main thing that you really have is like Hurricane Pollen Puff into Dondozo. You could maybe opt to Tailwind if you want to ensure you can outspeed. But every turn attack, you're using up your Rain as a resource, right? So like here, you want to be prioritizing getting some damage potentially, but we are going to see the Tailwind come out here. It is going to also probably be a Pollen Puff into the Dondozo, get some extra chip into it, but it's really not as much as you'd want. And now you, again, because Rain expired, you have to rely on landing your Hurricane side, right? So I'd say this situation is even better than the previous game, actually, where you have so many resources on Adi's side. You're probably in an even better spot to just put yourself in a spot to win the game off of the Pokemon you have alone.
Yeah, Dondozo now going to get that turn 1 wake up and protect itself against the Hurricane and the Pollen Puff from this Amoonguss. So next, with the Tailwind up, the Amoonguss is typically a very slow Pokemon, so I wouldn't be surprised if that Dondozo still outsped the Amoonguss. Now, I think Dondozo at this stage can't do very much to either Pelipper or the Amoonguss, but it's really just a matter of time before it gets knocked out and the rest of its teammates can do the work.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you could even just opt to throw a Heavy Slam into Amoonguss, get some into it, because Pelipper can obviously keep receiving Pollen Puffs from Amoonguss, but Amoonguss isn't going to be healing itself, right? So if you opt to throw an attack into the Amoonguss, probably that would be a bit more impactful because it can't really heal. But we are going to see the Hurricane land out of Rain. Is it going to get the critical hit? It does not. It does get the confusion. Hold on. All right. Let's see. This is
knock itself out?
Oh my god.
It's a self. Oh, that means if the Amoongus went for the Spore now, the Tatsugiri will be put to sleep. So, kind of like...
If it weren't for those safety goggles, right? Yeah.
Oh, right, that's right. Yes, I forgot the safety goggles. A Pollen Puff doing a little bit of chip damage, but that does allow this Indeedee to come in, and with no Wide Guard on a Pelipper, it means the Indeedee can just go for a Protect, stall out this turn on Tailwind, the final turn, and then just go for the Expanding Force.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. At this point, I still think Adi's in like an incredibly good position, like no question about it. I do think it's very funny though. Like that Dondozo is probably like it does not like Pelipper. Pelipper is Dondozo's #1 enemy. Like it's landing all these hurricanes. It's like getting critical hits. It's getting confusions, right? Like it just really does not like Dondozo. Dondozo does not like it back. And I think still in this position, Francesco, right? Obviously, that's a nice turn, right? You would love for the Dondozo to hit itself in confusion. You're still probably not in the best position here to win a game, right? Once the Tailwind expires, you're just able to go for Expanding Force and a double attack at Pelipper. The game pretty much ends on the spot, right? Because you used up Terra on the Incineroar. If there was Terra still around on the Amoongus, this actually could have been a really interesting endgame because you could have potentially played for like a Protect and like Terra Fairy Spore into the Indeedee, right? And then going for something maybe like a Hurricane Pollen Puff into yourself, right? Or Pollen Puff into Indeedee. But because of the nature of the situation at this point, Tatsugiri and Indeedee should be able to be relatively good here at cleaning up the game. It's interesting. I mean, you look at the game, right? And game 1 really convincing for Adi, right? Game 2, I would argue even more convincing for Adi, right? So like clearly Francesco needs to change up something about this approach to better deal with like the Indeedee. I think Indeedee is actually like this secret threat from Adi because even though the Sneasler is doing a lot of the damage, it's Indeedee that's really forcing the Incineroar in, right? So it's going to be about like how do I manage around that Indeedee Sneasler combination and make sure that I can deal with Expanding Force, but also get rid of these two Pokemon faster.
Yeah, the Indeedee and Sneasler combination is so lethal for Francesco, and there's just Francesco being forced to bring that Incineroar means he's really at risk of being vulnerable to the Indeedee, and it looks like we're going to get finally a terrestrialization from Adi's side onto this Indeedee, so those Expanding Forces are really, really going to hurt with that Indeedee growing its third eye there. So Pelipper going for the Protect, just wanting to keep itself safe for this turn. There's no Protect coming off onto this Amoongus, so this is a full-powered Expanding Force onto this Amoongus, and I'm sure this is going to be enough to get that knockout. And yep, easy one-hit knockout onto this Amoongus, and it's now Pelipper against all 3 of Adi's Pokemon.
Yeah, I can't say I was too optimistic about Amoongus being able to survive that attack, right? So yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation because I feel like from Adi's point of view, it's kind of a situation of like, okay, like do I even need to adjust, right? Like I had such a strong game 1, I had such a strong game 2, and like at this point, like what has Francesco shown me to be able to beat my combination of Pokemon that I brought? And from Francesco's side, you're like, okay, so I've tried the Basculegion Pelipper lead, it didn't go well. I've tried the Archaludon and Pelipper lead, it didn't go well. Maybe this time like leading Incineroar would have a bit more merit. I'd actually really like to see that coming out maybe, because then you'd be able to immediately go for like a knockoff or go for a parting shot, right? You have more immediate pressure there. I just feel like the issue is because Francesco's always forced to switch that right slot or left slot, I guess, into left slot for us, right slot. But switch out into the Incineroar every single time, you're forced into a position where your partner slot has to carry a lot of the weight. And the problem is that if it just gets double targeted, it's instantly not in a good position, right? In Arch's case, obviously, it got brought super low. It wasn't really able to kind of do much in the game after that. And in the case of Basculegion, it was just pretty much ruined for the rest of the because Indeedee was able to outspeed it. So I really feel like at this point, you're on Francesco's side, maybe even just completely leaning into the fact that Adi's going to go into Psychic Spam. Like we saw the Golden Go being a potential viable switch in for the Basculegion post combat. So maybe opting to go for something like Incineroar and Golden Go could be a really good lead.
Yeah, I think Adi has shown in both those game 1 and game 2 that the 4 Pokemon that he brought, they were the ones that he was most comfortable with leading into this game. So we're probably going to see the similar leads. It looks like Francesco going back to the game 1 with the Pelipper and Basculegion, but Adi once again sticking with the exact same leads of Indeedee Sneasler. So are we going to get a run back from game 1?
Yeah, it's interesting here. So I feel like the main mind game that you've opened up here, right, which makes sense a little bit, right, is sometimes if you're in a tricky matchup, you want to kind of open up a mind game to give yourself a bit of an advantage. And maybe that's what Francesco is trying to do here, is you can go for a Terra Water Flip Turn again in this, or calling it to attack this time, or you can kind of lock into the play that Adi made last time, so you can click something Tailwind, Terra Water Flip Turn into Indeedee, or regular Flip Turn into, right? Notably here, I feel like if Incineroar Hearts in, right, you need to make sure that you're protecting your Basculegion a little bit better, because if Basculegion is in a position where it's just going to get knocked out by combat or throat chop, you're at a big disadvantage, right? So we're gonna have to see how it goes here. Adi's kind of hovering the throat chop button, but you know, obviously you can go for a couple different here, but we are gonna see Basculegion withdraw. So
yeah, Francesco making a bit of a switch up here. Incineroar coming back in, or not back in, so just being revealed, but it's going to drop that Intimidate onto the Sneasler, so that's going to be very helpful in helping itself and its teammates survive. But that Diaclaw comes off, gets the sleep! Oh no, sir! No, he's going to shut down this Incineroar for at least one turn. Expanding Force now coming off onto Francesco's side, brings that Pelipper really low down into health, and does allow the Pelipper to get a Tailwind off, but Incineroar hasn't taken any turns of sleep just yet, so it's going to be only that Pelipper slot able to attack this turn.
Yeah, I mean, that is not, like, I would say if you're on Francesco's side, that's like a very devastating turn, right? Now you have a sleeping Incineroar that can't really do too much. You have a Pelipper that's super low on health and pressured by Dire Claw, right? And the great thing for Francesco is, okay, like, let's say I decide to play passive on Francesco's side, I go for Protect, and then Incineroar just goes down, you're automatically a disadvantage. There is a silver lining here, though, which is because you got the Tailwind up now, Basculegion is going to outspeed the Sneasler. So if you're able to navigate that Basculegion properly and kind of throw in these powerful last respects for wave crashes, you could get a lot of damage off here, but we are going to see a switch, and it's going to be going back into Basculegion. This is very risky. If you take too much damage on the Basculegion, you could be threatened by a knockout.
Yeah, Pelipper now going for a Protect under its own Tailwind, so allows the Sneasler to get a close combat off onto the Basculegion, so that's a fantastic switch in there. But there's still this Indeedee on the side going for those expanding forces, and that's going to deal heavy damage to this Basculegion. So Basculegion switching in, having taken quite a bit of damage, probably not something Francesco wanted to see there.
Yeah, it's tricky too, right? Because even though obviously Francesco getting the Basculegion and getting activated is good, you have a pretty safe play here if you're on Odyssey side, right? Which is just going for Dire Claw and Pelipper, because you can still threaten the knockout and Tailwind regardless. And even if Basculegion opts to target into your Sneasler with like Flip Turn, Expanding Force is still going to come out and knock out the Pelipper, right? And it can also threaten the K on the Basculegion if it opts for anything else. So I'd say Francesco is still a little bit on the back foot here, especially because of the sleeping Aurora that hasn't burned a turn. But there are some opportunities for sure to gain back the advantage, right? It's going to be really interesting. I'd probably expect the Flip Turn to come out somewhere. We're going to see Flip Turn go into that Indeedee. Most likely going to be bringing Aurora.
Yeah, the Indeedee now being knocked down to its Focus Sash from this Flip Turn. So looks like it's probably going to be, as you mentioned, Joe, an Incineroar coming back in, trying to drop that Sneasler attack down even further to -2. But it does mean that the Sneasler with the Unburden will still get to outspeed, and if it targets that Pelipper slot, that's going to be the Pelipper down and another turn. Yes, it's a close combat onto Pelipper. So Adi may be predicting an Incineroar switching on that Pelipper slot, but it needs to, I think there's one more turn of Tailwind left, so Adi can just go for a double Protect, burn out the Tailwind, and then there's no more speed control left on Francesco's side.
Yeah, I feel like we're in a very similar situation that we've seen to the previous games, which is Rain is nearing the end of its turn soon. Like, obviously, there's a couple more turns, and Tailwind is nearing the end of its soon. How does Francesco convert off of that, right? I mean, at this point, if you're not able to get enough value out of your Basculegion in time, then Dondozo Tatsugiri is just going to run the rest of the game, and you won't be able to win. So I really feel like here, like, it's really a race against time for Francesco. Are you able to break through enough resources before Rain expires? How do I navigate around that? I just feel like already this situation is pretty tough, because for Adi, it's very safe to just keep stalling out turns with Protect. Stall out that not to stall out the rain and stall out the tailwind, right?
Yeah, Adi, I think we saw a glimpse of him just going for that safe double protect. But first, Francesco is going to recall that Basque Legion and sends out the Among Us. So, a bit of a nice switch in maybe predicting that double protect there and maybe allowing those Rage Powders next turn, because Francesco had not gone for the Terror option, but now it looks like Adi burning down the final turn of Tailwind and once again giving himself that speed advantage. Incineroar does take its first turn of sleep, so there is a chance that it'll wake up, but there's still the Psychic Terrain is still active on the field, and let's see what Adi is going to go for this turn.
Yeah, there still is the opportunity, of course, of also going for the Terra Fairy on the Amoonguss, so you can live the Expanding Force, maybe get a Spore off into one of the slots and stall out the game a little bit. What's really tricky here, though, I think, is how do you stop this from getting too much damage, right? And I kind of mentioned in the previous matches that the Indeedee was kind of the sleeper threat, because even though, Sneasler was the main thing you saw, like, dealing damage, Incineroar, the other slots, right? Indeedee has been, like, putting on so much pressure, right? And I do think it was a very, like, smart play for Francesco to just immediately switch Basque Legion to Amoonguss. It's a pretty safe play or not a safe play, but it's, like, a smart play to cover for Adi's safe play of double protecting, because it gives you the most options possible on this turn. But even then, right, I think you're going to have to hope for Incineroar to wake up early. Otherwise, it's just going to be too many reasons for you to... So I think at this point, you really just need to hope that you can take a close bat, wake up, and get out of there.
Yeah, Indeedee once again goes for the Terror, and that close combat is not enough to get the knockout onto this Incineroar without that helping hand boost, and Sneasler at -2. Sneasler also taking a bit of Rocky Helmet damage, so Indeedee's Terra Psychic, a little bit of a whiff going into that Protect there, and Francesco also having baited out Adi's Terra option, but Francesco is still not in the greatest position. Incineroar takes another turn of sleep, so this Indeedee is still safe, and critically though, the Psychic Terrain is going to expire this turn.
Yeah, a big thing here that actually is like a really cool possibility is that if you... Okay, so you have to get a couple turns, right? So I think Adi's the safest play most likely is close combat Incineroar. You're always pinning the damage Incineroar and go for an Expanding Force into it. You could also just opt to go for switches here, kind of reposition, get your Indeedee's terrain back on the board, which is also really good. So I feel like at this point, if you're Francesco, you really need to lock in on the place Adi is making. That being said, like, it's going to be about getting a Pollen Puff on, getting a Pollen Puff back on your Basque Legion, and eventually navigating in a position where you can utilize those. So are we going to see a switch of Incineroar, maybe calling out that Indeedee is going to switch, or are we going to see something like a Terra Fairy, Incineroar stays in, and go for 4?
It looks like this Indeedee is going to switch out to try and reset the Psychic Terrain for later on. Tatsugiri is going to switch in.
Oh, it is a withdrawal.
Really nice switch for a safety goggles. So Francesco also swapping out his Incineroar. Does Adi call this and go for maybe an attack onto its does that get any...
Oh,
that is huge, because now this Basque Legion is going to have its speed reduced and the Spore going off into Tatsugiri. So a wonderful call there from Adi, just switching in that Tatsugiri and safety goggles. Not a very common item on Tatsugiri, but just here paying off dividends.
Wow, yeah, I mean that was a big turn, right? Because like from Adi's point of view, right? If you're able to get any status on the Basque Legion, even if it's poison, it's incredibly good for you, right? And at this point, like, the Amoonguss, had it gone for Spore into Sneasler, actually still would have maybe had some odds here to win. But even then, like, it's really tricky because the Tatsugiri having safety goggles makes it so strong in this endgame. Like, it doesn't even need Dondozo to actually do what it wants to do, right? And I think, like, that's a big deal. Oh, we're going to see a disconnect here.